Okay.
And wow, is manifestation hard when you are trying to embody consciousness? I still haven't finished the journey. It's still going on.
Yes.
And I don't know if in this life I will ever be manifested being, like
But
I think...
do you see that? Do you see what is still going on? Do you see that as also an element of doing on your in your part in being aware of your reaction to situations and your programming, or do you see it as a process that happens on its own, or a bit of both, maybe?
I think I have resolved that to some extent by realizing that there will be a time when I will know. Right now, I'm very much into what I call accomplishment. I want to accomplish. I want to change the world. I want to change myself. I want to love my wife even better than I do today, without even less reaction that I have today. I want to have that same relationship with everyone in the world, even with my antagonists. Jesus did say, love thy enemy.
Yeah.
I take it very seriously.
Yes.
If I can learn how to love my enemy, that day I might say that, okay, Amit Goswami, you have crossed another hurdle about manifesting love in your life.
Okay, at this point, I want to very much connect that with something else that I thought was very interesting, which is how you see free will. Because pretty much with upward causation, I understand free will doesn't really exist.
Right.
But with downward causation, there is an element of free will. So you can have the intent to love your wife or be more creative or whatever, because that is contained in the downward causation.
That could be contained in the downward causation. But
be,
by intention from the ego level, we just put out the word, we just put out the idea. And then it's a question of, will the idea resonate with non-local consciousness? Because ultimately the quantum chooser is at that non-local level of consciousness.
So we put from our self, individual self, we put the idea out, and it's almost where the decision gets made in an area which is not separate, but it's part of the non-local, as you call it, consciousness, which is part of the oneness, as I would call it.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
And we can be a little more specific. So any conscious idea that we generate, that idea, if it is sufficiently stoked, will get into the unconscious, because a memory will be made, and whenever we are not collapsing thoughts, that memory will play in the unconscious. Possibilities will be generated from that memory. This is what we're looking for. So the possibility of transformation, this unhappiness that I don't know how to love, this helplessness, that what makes me so irritable, what makes me so defensive in my reactions when a love object comes into the vicinity. What is it? We can't handle our irritability or defensiveness with an intimate person. If it's not intimate, we do fine, oftentimes. But with intimate people, we always get into this defensiveness, irritability, negative reaction. Why is that? Because we have these memories, and they're continuously giving possibilities into our unconscious. So by stoking love, stoking the intention, we create additional possibilities in the unconscious. And these other possibilities and these existing possibilities, they interact. They have interaction, this conflict. Will you go on the same old way, or can you change?
You see, you also talk about in one of your books about how the feeling that we're separate, or the belief that we're separate, is causing a lot of our pain.
Yes, belief that we are separate actually does produce a separateness of mind from the physical, vital from the physical. Our feelings become separate from thinking, and this is pain. It's I have felt pain several times in my life, especially when I have become single in between my marriages. Those times of intense loneliness, you feel separate from the whole. Why do you feel separate? You feel completely unloved. You feel that nobody cares for you. In those moments, if you knew that there is a quantum self, a representation of God, in ourselves. And there is this self to comfort us. Many people call this self as God, the comforting God, the God that comes to your aid, to whom you call out when you are in danger, when you are lonely, when you are feeling separate. But I didn't even know, after my first marriage broke up, I didn't even know that this happens. The second time my marriage broke up, I did know. And this was much, much less the loneliness. I did feel a little, but I did not feel anything with the intensity that I felt first time. So indeed, this kind of realization helps us to deal with separateness. And if you are not separate anymore, that's already a very good sign. But coming back to what signals the end of the search, so long as I have accomplishment orientation, I want to accomplish. So long as that happens, we accomplish. And that accomplishment may involve outer stuff. I write books. Accomplishment may also involve inner stuff. I learn to love. And this goes on. I learn to be more just. I learn to appreciate beauty a little more. I learn to appreciate truth a lot more, and so forth. Both goes on, but these are all accomplishments. A time comes that when you just are bored about accomplishments. You don't care anymore. This is the crucial thing. When that comes, then you are ready to do your final accomplishment. And this is the search for self-realization. Then you want to realize how God is represented in this, what is called the quantum self that I mentioned a little early on. Then you want to know this quantum self directly. This is not a jnana experience like I had before. This is not an ordinary samadhi experience which I also had. This self-realization experience is beyond all experiences. This is the highest experience that a human being can go. Then you know the nature of the self. When that creative idea comes, what is the self? By direct realization. Even then, though, you have to do the final step of that creative process, which is to manifest, shift your identity from the ego to the quantum self. Manifest God in your life.
In a way, that's a dilemma, because the one that often wants to have the shift is the ego itself, because it thinks it's going to be happier.
So that is why spiritual traditions always say surrender the ego. That's the last step. And you know how ordinary people interpret what spiritual traditions say and what gurus tell you? It's horrible, because everybody interprets they have to give up the ego to gain access to spirituality. No, spirituality contains, in the vast part of the spiritual journey, spirituality has to involve the ego, because without the ego there is no creativity.
Yes, well, I was just looking at my notes, because you talk about this, that we need the ego. Ego loves the old. It's conditioned, as you said, but it also gives us a reference point too, which is important. It gives us stability.
Who would we be?
In a human interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So long as who would I be is important to me. So long as that importance remains, how can I give up the ego? Now, how many people do you see around, including the gurus around us, including those people who are, great thinkers and we respect them, supposed to be enlightened and all this? How many people do you know whom you can go and take your shoe off and give a throw on the head? How many people do you know that don't feel insulted and would start shouting at you? So when you are in that state, when nothing is an insult anymore because you are nobody. Richard Alpert was he later confessed to me that he was a pretender, but he went through that. He went through that phase where he used to pretend. He used to start his talks as, I'm nobody special, talking about nothing special. But he knew, he told me himself that I knew that, of course, I'm faking, because this is what I'm supposed to say. So when that happens, then we come back and realize that we have a lot of work to do. That stage has not come yet. When that stage comes, when I'm ready, then I won't be interested in myself anymore. I'm ready to let it go. At that point, we can start the final journey. Before that, if you start it, it's fruitless, because you will have the experience of self-realization, but you will still want to be somebody with that realization.
I think the two run for a time, don't they, for many people that are searching. and open to looking, both are running. There's still the wanting to be to a degree successful on the outside, still looking, and yet the understanding that the fundamental work is on the inside. And I suspect that's been the same for you for many years.
The fundamental work is to giving up that search, giving up the idea of being somebody, being the teacher, being the guru, being the world teacher, being the world-renowned great person who everybody listens to. All that just drops away. Then you just sit. If people come to you, fine. Let them be happy, that's fine. Doesn't matter. But you are always situated in that peace. This is what brings that extra capacity of non-local consciousness in the proximity of great people.
And that's what we're all looking for, really, is peace, isn't it?
Yes. Ultimately, we are looking for a complete, peaceful mind.
Yes.
It's a tremendous journey.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful that quantum physics allows me to understand most of this journey, although I have not achieved some of these later stages. But quantum physics allows me to analyze even the highest stage of realization, I think, I hope.
Right. I'd like to go back a bit, and something we didn't cover in any kind of detail, which I think would be helpful for people and for me too, would be this point at which we need the observer for the ground of being to become something tangible. And I know you talk about a quantum collapse, which is not easy to grasp. Can you just take us through that, how that fits together?
Well, this is the most complex question of the theory that had to be built. This question, how consciousness actually embodies itself in the brain, amounts to the brain having a very special situation in its body. It has to have a very special situation with which consciousness can get trapped, consciousness can identify. Because that's what must be happening. Look, the observer himself or herself is also quantum possibility. So the possibility is looking at possibility, cannot be denied. You, possibility, looking at this flower possibility. I hope the flower is coming on the television picture.
It is, I can see it on the monitor, it's there.
So, possibility looking at possibility. How does collapse happens, and then this possibility becomes actualized, but where went the brain? Where did the brain go? If you were outside of both brain and the flower...
Yeah, I think you must describe, first of all, explain what is collapse. What do you mean by collapse?
Collapse is just another word. I have a habit of, technical habit of a physicist. Physicists call from the beginning this idea of wave becoming particle as wave collapsing into a particle.
Okay. So in a way, it's usually the other way around. If something collapses, it disintegrates. But here you're saying the collapse is nothing becoming something in one way.
In a way, yes. Nothing becoming something, manifestation.
That's the collapse. It's the collapse of the wave. The wave is becoming the possibility.
Yeah, possibility becoming
But you need the observer effect for that to happen.
You need the observer effect. So, but observer is also possibility. So what has happened is that consciousness, why don't we see the brain in the process? Because both collapsed. Flower there, brain there. But you are not seeing the brain, you are seeing only the flower. In the process, consciousness is identified with your brain. And the brain is saying, I see the flower. So what is in the brain that allows consciousness to identify with the brain? This is the key question. And the answer actually was given by a fellow, without knowing it, named Dag Hofstadter, brilliant physicist. I knew him actually, who was a student at the University of Oregon, where I taught. He wrote a book called Gödel, Escher, Bach, beautiful book. In that he suggested that if you have a tangled hierarchical system, a system in which you cannot trace the hierarchy from the beginning to the end. In between there is a singularity, a discontinuity, so that it's impossible to construct these tangled hierarchical systems from scratch. Does the brain have that? Yes, the brain does have it. If you think about it, brain at the surface state, at the macroscopic state, allows ourselves to perceive, and then it makes memory. That if you look at these two concepts, perception and memory, perception, of course, is required for memory, but funny thing is that memory is also required for perception. There are many, many stories that if you have no memory of an object, you cannot see it.
Well, that's right. I've read that many times.
Uh-huh.
In fact, Deepak Chopra, you
Yes.
talked about earlier, he was, I remember reading once that he was talking about certain tribes in the Amazon. They can see, they're like when we see a plane and we see the exhaust behind the plane, they can see something similar behind birds when they fly.
Yeah.
And they can see that, but we can't see that because we're not trained to see it.
Uh-huh.
It's not our reality, is it? Our consensus reality.
So that's a tangled hierarchy. When two things require each other, that's a tangled hierarchy. So brain has a tangled hierarchy. If there is a tangled hierarchy, then we identify with it. To see the identity, examine the sentence, I am a liar. If I am a liar, then I am telling the truth. If I am telling the truth, then I am lying. If I am a liar, then I am telling the truth. If I am telling the truth, I am lying. If you go on ad infinitum, notice that you cannot really come out without consciously realizing, what am I doing? This is silly. I won't play this game, and you jump out. But you tend to identify. For a while, it will require tempting to go on. Oh, this is fun. Children, in fact, sometimes start crying because they would say, I cannot just go on like this, but how do I get out? So that's a tangled hierarchy, this infinite oscillation between two extremes.
But where did the initial observer come from to create the manifestation
now
of the
examine
universe?
So now examine it going back, and what do you see? If I am identified, if I am trapped in this circularity, right, then I am identified with the sentence. So similarly, if I am trapped in the circularity of the brain, perception requires memory, memory requires perception, then I am identified with the brain. So what we call the observer arises after the event of collapse, after the change of possibility into actuality. In the process, both subject, the identification of consciousness with the tangled hierarchical brain, and the change of the object, collapse of the object, both have taken place in the same process of choice. Consciousness chooses, out of the choice is born the observer, as well as what the observer is observing. So this is why Krishnamurti, there was a very beautiful word that Krishnamurti used. For the brain, observer is the observed. I have read that sentence many times before.
Say that again. For the brain,
the brain, observer is the observed.
The observer is the
How do you think of the brain processing a picture of you that I am processing right now? You are an image on my retina. This much everybody understands. And then that retina image is processed by electrical system of the brain. Everybody understands. But then you get an electrical image. Is that electrical image somebody, a little me watching in the back of the brain? There is a television screen and a little me, a homunculus, is watching that. That kind of funny picture. That's what people have, unfortunately. So by recognizing that, no, the observer and the observed, the homunculus and the picture on the screen, they are the same. There is no difference. There is no distinction. The observer arises because consciousness is identified with this whole thing, memory and perception, the whole apparatus that we call the brain. That's the mystery of how consciousness becomes embodied. And this mystery cannot be solved within scientific materialism. There is just no way. Scientific materialism says we have a science of objects. Objects only gives you object. You can never get a subject separate from the object by starting with objects. You've got to start with consciousness.
Okay. So does the universe have a purpose?
Yes, the universe has a purpose, and that purpose is to manifest the highest ideals, which Plato called archetypes. Aurobindo had even a more beautiful name, supramental, the supramental values.
But how do you know this?
How do I know this? By studying the theory of evolution from a consciousness point of view.
Okay.
Theory of evolution is conventionally seen as Darwinian. In fact, media treats Darwinism as evolutionism, basically. It is not right. This is just so very wrong. Because in normal circumstances, if physicists, biologists, chemists did not have such a feud with religions, under normal circumstances, all scientists, in fact, physicists and chemists do recognize this. It's the biologists who are very stubborn, would recognize that Darwin's theory just does not hold water. It is a good theory. It has served well the purpose of developing biology as a science, because there was nothing before Darwin, nothing much. So Darwin made biology respectable. All that is true. But that's only historical gratitude. Like physics is very grateful to Newton for what he did. But to say that physics is Newton today would be a complete mistake. Newton has been suppressed by Einstein, by quantum physics, and many, many developments have occurred in physics that Newton could not even dream of. So biologists should be able to do the same thing, except that they cannot because of this feud with religion. Christians, even to this day, creationists hold a completely different picture that defies evolution because they are so sure that everything in the Bible must be literally true. Just similarly, the biologists have accepted the dogma that Darwinism must be absolute. If you give up Darwinism, it's very easy to see that there are gaps. There are gaps in the fossil records, and these gaps has to come from somewhere because they suggest that consciousness must have two tempos, one very fast and one slow, like Darwin says. So Darwinism describes a slow evolution. This fast evolution, how does that come? If you are looking from consciousness point of view, remember the process of creativity, quantum leap,
Yes.
this continuous
Yes.
change, that is the key. So the fast aspects of evolution, if you explain that as quantum leap of consciousness, you include consciousness. So why is consciousness creatively unfolding the world, manifesting the world in progressive steps of creativity? Why is it doing that? You find immediately, you find one astounding thing. The amoeba and humans both have some commonality. Amoeba can reproduce, so can the human. But look at the biological process of reproduction. Amoeba reproduces by cell division. That's it. They don't even have differences of male and female. No sexuality there. Male-female develops a little later on in evolution. One progress already, but still sex is being used for just reproduction. And then later on brain develops, we have circuits of pleasure, then sex is used for pleasure. Second stage of sex. But for human beings, especially in the 21st century, people are already moving on to another, even higher exploration of sexuality and reproduction. And this is the use of sex to make love. Make love. Nothing less than love. They are investigating, can I love my sexual partner unconditionally? Many people are searching like this. I teach people to do that because in my own life, that is a major practice. This kind of evolution of something that starts at a rudimentary level, but then ends up becoming better and better representation. This is the objective of evolution. Initially, we cannot fathom love. So we don't have it. It's just self-dividing. And then we have, okay, there is the possibility of loving the other, but it's remote. It's just sexual reproduction. And then it becomes a little bit better. Now there is pleasure in sexuality. So the other is welcome now, not just mere reproduction. Other is good. It will give me pleasure. And then stage comes where the other is necessary for the exploration of a value, love. And then maybe there are even higher stage, which we don't know about.
So how do you put this together with, because you have this book, Quantum Activism Can Save Civilization. How does this come together on a practical basis?
This is, of course, I feel the most important thing today for all thinking people, all feeling people, all people who want to integrate their lives like I did, have to face up with. What these ideas that we spoke of as scientific materialism, consciousness doesn't exist except as brain phenomenon, matter is everything. what these ideas have done is literally undermine those values, which is the purpose of evolution, which is what makes living worthwhile. Consciousness gives us values. If you denigrate consciousness, values would automatically be denigrated. Does the brain as a conglomerate of elementary particles have values? Material scientists try to bring values back in through evolution, but they cannot do it because matter cannot even process meaning, let alone values. These things are subjects of scientific proof today. We should give up on scientific materialism if we want to save civilization. Unfortunately, scientific materialism is also very entrenched today. You have to realize that, and then you have to recognize the power of activism.
But you see, when I switch on my TV, which I do sometimes, and I watch the news, it doesn't matter which news channel you watch, it's not usually very encouraging. So I'm just wondering how, obviously, quantum activism in itself is what you see as a way forward, and yet it would seem, from our media anyway, that the way forward is a long way away, if there is one. And I just wonder how you see it practically for the average person, what quantum activism means.
This is what the average person needs to know. It does seem very remote today. But you know, two answers. First of all, it seemed remote when a few scientists, Descartes, Francis Bacon, few scientists were struggling against the power of the church. It seemed very remote then, didn't it? So it means nothing that it seems very remote. Several decades ago, it seemed remote that communism can ever break down in Russia. So how movement of consciousness work is actually by jolts, by surprises. This is what the nature of creativity is. So that's one answer.
So that's the quantum side, is the surprise side.
Surprise side of it. It would be creative. It would be a revolution. It would be some kind of, not social revolution.
The Arab Spring was a big change. We weren't really
but big changes come abruptly, suddenly, even social changes. The other aspect is, which is very, very hopeful for everyone, I hope, which is that it does not take very many people to do it. Rupert Sheldrake first had this intuition. He published a book, or several books in the 80s, where he put forth this idea that only a few people, because changes that we make in our brain involves what Sheldrake called morphogenetic field.
Yes.
These fields that are responsible in some way, that I call blueprints of biological form. So when we change the brain, make a positive emotional brain circuit of love, let's say, the morphogenetic fields associated with love, which is the blueprint of that brain, that becomes associated with love, and therefore it will become a loving morphogenetic field. It's a changed morphogenetic field. That change, I was able to show, Mark Mitchell and I, that that change in the morphogenetic field is stored not in the brain, but is stored non-locally. Quantum memory is non-local memory, outside of space and time, everywhere and nowhere. And then what happens? If it's non-local memory, anyone on Earth, irrespective of time and space, can access it, right?
Yeah.
Right. So in the future, this is the vision. Vision is that if enough of us become conscious that we need to change, and we are capable of the creative experience, we are capable of turning our creativity inward, create brain circuits of love. And we do it in communities, we do it in groups, we do it in such a way that non-locality will be facilitated. What happens? So these non-local memories are available in the future, and they are used automatically without effort.
But you see, I mean, and I think you talk about this in one of the books. It's people in a way struggle for values. They're very caught in the whole consumerism, the whole materialistic aspect of society, and many people are very lost in terms of where to start.
Yeah, so that's the other part of quantum activism. So we develop these people who will develop brain circuits which will then propagate in the future through non-local means. That's one idea. And the other idea that is very important to recognize is that we can change the marketplace. Right now, the marketplace only sells material goods, and it's sort of almost hypnotic. We go on believing that a more capable cell phone is going to give a more satisfactory life. Of course, it doesn't. So unhappiness actually goes on increasing in this consumer society. But suppose we started consume the stuff that we value. Suppose we started consume meaning, values, and especially, I'll tell you the real key of this is, suppose we started making vital energy, vitality, as a commodity in the marketplace.